Well, speaking of compliments, as listeners of the show can attest, I know quite a few elite guitar players who are big fans of yours. I reached out to some of them to solicit their input. Some responded in writing, others in audio. And, don't worry, I'm not going to force you to sit there uncomfortably while I heap a lot of random praise on you. That's not what this is about. What I want to do is take some of their observations and use them to springboard into some interesting discussion points. Let's start with Mark Bonilla, who, among other things, was the lead guitarist in the Keith Emerson Band for many years. I mentioned road games being my entry point into your solo work, but it wasn't my first exposure to your playing. I'd already heard some of the work you've done with other artists. I mentioned that because it was also the case for Mark. So here's what Mark had to say. When I first heard that final guitar phrase on Allan's second solo break in Jean-Luc Ponty's Enigmatic Ocean Part 2, I literally fell off my chair. It was like this nubile young temptress had entered through the beaded curtains and started massaging my neck, lulling me into this blissful altered state, only to have my neck snapped in one short stroke with a flick of 5 fingers. I was never the same after that. Allan's phrasing is so unorthodox, patient at times, feeding you a spoonful of sonic nourishment, letting you chew your food, taste it, and swallow it before handing you another, and then magically growing 6 more fingers in order to pave the fretboard in note choices and sensual tones heretofore undiscovered or expressed. That's what the right beer can do. So,
apparently.
yes.
No, that's very sweet. That was very kind words indeed.
So thank you, Mark, for your typical blend of eloquent insight and down-to-earth humor. Enigmatic Ocean was also one of my first exposures to you, so I know exactly the passage he's referring to. And his description of hearing you for the first time, I think we all had a pretty uniform reaction, which was, who is this guy? It's like hearing Hendrix or Van Halen for the first time. It definitely commands your attention. And rather than getting your reaction, to our reaction to your playing, I want to know, have you ever had a similar experience where you were blown away by an artist the first time you heard them?
Yeah, I felt that way when I first heard John Coltrane.
Of course, yeah.
And I felt that way when I first heard Keith Jarrett, because of my upbringing, my dad had he was a fine pianist, and he had lots and lots of records, of the jazz guys from the eras before. And I remember when I first heard Keith Jarrett, I played it to my dad, and he was like, "Oh my God, that's insane!" So, I had. Of course, with guitar players too, obviously, like when I first heard John McLaughlin or Pat Murphy, any of the great guys. I mean, they all affect you in some way or another. I never had the desire to try to knock them off in any way, but I was certainly inspired, by almost everybody that I've ever heard. There's so many great players out there now. It's insane.
Yeah, I once bought a jazz guitar compilation, and it was the first time I ever heard Wes Montgomery. And, his playing, particularly compared to all the others, it was just so tasteful and so confident and so elegant. And he made it seem so effortless. It was like, well, of course you play jazz guitar like this. Why wouldn't you? That's the message I got from it. I was going, oh my gosh. And so I immediately got everything else he ever did. I also appreciate what Mark said about your phrasing, because while you do have the ability to play quite rapidly when you want to, if that's what you're feeling, you obviously, mix it up. It's not just about velocity. That's why I'm so fond of your Devil Take the Hindmost solo. I enjoy the slow parts as much as the fast ones.
I try to kind of, for me, everything's about trying to make melodies out, not just to kind of demonstrate how rapidly you can do something, how fast can I run a mile? It's not. It wasn't like that for me. I mean, if that happened, then it was fine. But I just try to make melodies, because that's, for me, like what improvising is all about. It's about trying to solo over the chord sequence and try to make melodies out of it,
Well, now let's hear from another talented guitar player. Here's what Jesse Solomon had to say. Allan's music was incredibly important to me in my development as a player. His chords and swells were inspiring, even though I had no idea what he was doing. The tone he drew from his guitar and electronics was extraordinary. I never felt like trying to recreate his music as much as I liked to emulate the emotions that it made me feel. In that sense, his influence on me wasn't as apparent to somebody listening to me. I like a lot of his sensibilities with layers, solos, and overall arrangements, and his interplay with the musicians he plays with. The picture of Allan and Eddie Van Halen in the brochure for Musicians Institute was all it took for me to want to go there. Seeing Allan play back in '85 when I was at GIT was amazing, and also having Chad Wackerman come to the school was inspiring. Of course, Jeff Berlin was a teacher there too. A memory I have of Allan was a time I was at the NAMM show looking at some guitars, and he came over, said hi to me, and said, "You're from Fort Collins?" He saw that on my badge. I said, "Yes," but I was thinking, this is Allan Holdsworth. How come he's saying hi, and how does he know Fort Collins? He went on to tell me he had friends from Boulder and that he'd enjoyed some Coors beer and touring the brewery in Golden. So that was a cool little exchange. I'm happy to have been able to watch him play over the years and have more conversations with him. Most recently, when my friend Chris Van Tassel at Rocket Pedals designed a pedal for him. I like what Jesse said about, and you said something similar a little bit ago, about trying to recreate the emotions you made him feel in his playing. You know, when he played, he wants to recreate the emotions as opposed to just copying licks. That seems very wise and insightful to me. And I can also relate to what he said about there being a sense of mystery with certain aspects of your playing, you know, the how is he doing that factor. What's the pedal Jesse's referring to?
It was like I was trying to, before that I'd been using, for many years, I still do actually use a TC booster pedal because it's not a distortion pedal at all. It just like, I always like the sound of Alnico pickups, you know, the ones that like the old original PAFs from the Gibsons back in the day. They were pretty low output compared to modern pickups. So I like to use the booster. It was just like another way to push the front end of the amplifier a little harder without adding any extra distortion. You know, you just actually still using the amplifier to make the sound without adding any extra grunge to it or whatever. So what we tried to do with that pedal that I worked on with Chris was like a combination. It had a clean boost to it, but it also had a section which could develop some kind of distortion because they wanted to do that for the guys that were more used to that kind of a sound. It was kind of a hybrid pedal.
I see. Interesting. Well, we have one more written comment before we break out the sound bites. This is from Mike Jacobs, who says, along with Jaco Pastorius and Jimi Hendrix, I can't think of another musician that has been a bigger game changer on an instrument than Allan Holdsworth. From his astounding facility and technique and innovative use of technology and equipment to his forging of a harmonic and compositional identity like no other, Allan has created his own sonic universe that is virtually unrivaled in depth and scope. From rockers to jazzers, he's inspired and influenced multiple generations of guitarists in countless ways. There are probably 100 different things you could do on guitar that might elicit the response he or she has listened to Holdsworth. He's a wonder and a true musical treasure.
Ouch. Yeah. Again, very, 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 very kind chap.
Yes, he is. And he knows his music. He knows his music, Mike does. I know what he means about the transparency of your influence, because I've heard recordings of myself improvising and soloing, and they definitely include moments that would expose me as a quote-unquote guy who's listened to Holdsworth. I'll be listening, oh, that series of notes is, you come into the person's subconscious and it just comes out, So when you hear other guitar players play something that's clearly derived from your style, do you feel flattered or do you feel proprietary?
No, I'm always flattered. No, it's nice. It's cool. No, if it's too blatant, then I don't like it so much because it's like, oh, you could have spent just as much time trying to figure out how you want to do something as you did trying to figure out what that was. It's like,
yeah,
But it's still a nice thing, Go, oh, I guess that guy or that gal or whatever had actually listened to something and it affected them in a way that they wanted to employ it themselves in some way. So the only ones that get offensive are really when it gets too deep into it. Then I really don't like that, because I think that person or that individual could have spent more time trying to develop their own voice rather than trying to figure out how somebody developed their voice. Trying to emulate somebody to a point is okay, but after a certain point it becomes a little obnoxious. So I've done it myself, but the thing is, mostly I let the music inspire me rather than the specifics of it, if you know what I mean.
I do. Like if somebody sees you play, they should go, I like what he did there. I'll find a way to incorporate it into my style and put an original twist on it instead of just copying it note for note because it's been done already. I have to tell you, I asked Dick Dale the same question about surf guitarists, and I can tell you he definitely landed in the proprietary camp because my feeling was all these bands like the Ventures and the Safaris, they were having big hits that were blatantly derived from a style that he had created. So what I was wondering is if he had, felt a sense of community. We're the surf guitarists. If you create a style the way he did, and then a year or two later, Wipe Out and Walk Don't Run comes out, are you going to think, oh, great, people have done stuff with my style? Or are you going to think, they're ripping me off? He never really answered it, but the impression I got was he didn't like it. He wanted to be the only surf guitar player in the world.
Well, I got over that pretty quickly, really, because as soon as particularly with the internet and everything, it's like nothing's sacred anymore. It's all open to everybody, and it's good because if somebody can take something that I did and move it forward, and make it better, because I'm an old man now, I'm 70 years old, so I don't have the same kind of outlook on life as I did when I was 25. I might have been more offended when I was younger than I am now. I just think it's all okay. It's okay.
Yeah, remember 70 is the new 65 or something like that, however they say it.
Not in my case. I feel every minute of it, believe me.
Well, now it's time for our first audio clip. Let's check this out.
Hi, my name is Joel Martin. I'd like to thank Allan for constant and extreme inspiration for 30 years, which is almost the entire length I've been a musician. I started playing guitar a month before I turned 12, and 2 years later, in 1986, I joined my first two bands. One featured a 9-year-old Brooks Wackerman, and I'd heard that Brooks's brother played with this Allan Holdsworth guy and Frank Zappa, but those were only two names I'd heard in Guitar Player magazine. The other band had a young female lead singer, and she gave me a cassette tape of her songs, that she'd recorded on like a TDK or something. And I listened to her songs to learn, and then they ended, and this music she taped over started. And it was the most glorious guitar sound I'd ever heard in my entire life. I just did not know how a guitar could sound that good. So I went back to her and said, "What was this?" She said, "I have no idea. It's just a tape someone gave me, and I taped my stuff on it." So I thought that was done. End of that story. So the following year, I was going to school at Grove School of Music, and I see a friend with some headphones on. I go up to him, and I'm like, "Hey, what are you listening to?" He goes, "I'm listening to Allan Holdsworth." I'm like, "Oh, I've never really got to check him out before." He goes, "What? You're a guitarist and you don't know Allan Holdsworth?" So it was just like a movie. It was an incredible moment. He put the headphones on my head, pressed play, and the beginning of Metal Fatigue started. And every part of my brain must have lit up. I'm a young, impressionable guitarist, and that was just perfect music. So I was hooked. I was a complete devout Allan Holdsworth fanatic, and I went to every show that my fake ID could get me into in Southern California. I even got to see a special show because of my Brooks Wackerman connection, Chuck Wackerman's middle school and high school band concert in Seal Beach featuring the Allan Holdsworth Band. Loved it. And about the same time, I was getting into progressive rock and learning about King Crimson and getting into Bill Bruford and John Wetton. So I found out that there was this UK record with everybody on it. And I went and found it, and I'm listening to it down, and at the end of side one, there's Nevermore, and there was that guitar melody that I'd heard years before. I finally got to track it down and know that it was Allan, which completely made sense. So I just want to thank you, Allan, because all of your records have really affected me from Lifetime all the way to your current work, and just want you to know that. Thank you. Cheers.
Well, thank you, Joel.
Indeed.
No, I can relate to what he said about hearing that UK track, filing it away in his head, and then somewhere down the line experiencing that moment of discovery, like, oh, that's what that is. I think we've all done that. And, one of the things about doing this show is I learned things about my friends. I mean, I didn't know he played with Chad Wackerman's brother and everything. It's pretty interesting to hear, too. But sometimes people hear something and they think they know what it is when they really don't. For example, there's a Rod Stewart video with Jeff Beck in it, so everyone assumes all the guitars on that track were played by Jeff when they weren't. And similarly, while the solo on Michael Jackson's Beat It is performed by Eddie Van Halen, all the rest of the guitar on that track, which is considerable, was done by Steve Lukather. And speaking of Jeff Beck and Michael Jackson, next we're going to hear a clip from a guitarist who has collaborated with both. So let's hear what Jennifer Batten has to say.
Allan is about 10 levels above a black belt on guitar, and it's a level that most guitar players don't even think of aspiring to because it's in a whole other dimension. I had a great conversation with Chad Wackerman once, and he told me Allan explained time like this. When you're having a conversation, it's not stiff and boxed in time. A spoken paragraph isn't necessarily going to fit into 2 or 4 bars rhythmically. So if you have a couple extra words beyond the bar line, that bar might become maybe 5-4 or 9-8. So he looks at music like a conversation, and that makes a lot of sense in theory. His approach would seem a lot more natural and human. In fact, old blues guys that didn't play with a drummer did it that way. They made their bars fit their words. I spoke with another drummer that worked with Allan, and he agreed with me that we both had no idea where one was for his entire shows until that guy actually learned the tunes, and then it made sense. Steve Lynch from the 80s band Autograph was a fellow student when I was at GIT, and I learned tapping from him, and he's the guy that turned me onto one of the Soft Machine records that Allan was on. And it was stunning how original and fluid his sound was, to the point where it actually sounded kind of like fretless. And I think that's one of the inspirations for Steve to get into tapping, to make the guitar sound more fluid than picking each note. Years later, I had a student that spent a lot of time trying to cop Allan's style or his sound, and the guy's fingers were so strong he could pull the strings towards the nut to make them go flat. He told me Allan didn't use the tremolo bar as much as you would think because he used that technique. I tried briefly to give it a shot and realized I just didn't have the kind of strength to do that. So instead, I used the snot out of the tremolo bar and the whammy pedal set to a whole step down to get those bends. The last time I saw him was in Portland when he did kind of a free-for-all with Tony Levin and Terry Bozzio. Only the cream of the crop would have the balls to attempt a show of total improv, having faith in their creativity at any given moment to make that work. I worked on one of my favorite songs of his, Tokyo Dream, that was released in a songbook, and maybe one other in that book. And I think maybe inside that book, or maybe it was in a Guitar Player article, it was explained that Allan would come up with scales that would work for the wacky chords he came up with, which just seems crazy. For the rest of the world, including myself, using known scales is enough for a lifetime of work. He's definitely the cream of the crop, and I have the utmost respect for him.
Well, thank you, Jennifer.
Beautiful and very kind again, because she's fantastic.
Yeah, she is. She's amazing. She's been on the show twice. She mentioned you being a black belt on the guitar, so do you want me to start calling you Sensei for the rest of the interview?
No, absolutely not. I'm a white belt. I haven't even started. I don't know.
Do you need a pause and break a board or anything?